Judge Claudia Wilken has officially put the House settlement through. She's approved it. And that means Iowa State just got a lot better. We're talking about it today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day and making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting platform, be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is in fact a Cyclone state. Today we are really breaking down this House versus NCAA settlement that has gone through. We'll talk about kind of what happened, what the final situation sort of looks like. We'll dive into rev share. We'll dive into all of the nitty gritty and how it affects Iowa State. I can't wait to get into all of that, of course. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. The final question I'm going to ask today, you're going to want to stick around because it's a head spinner. I tell you what, and I want to hear your answers, your thoughts, either in the comments below or at Nick_Marv on Twitter. Let's dive into the NCAA versus House settlement finally being settled. Judge Claudia Wilken has decided this is all right. We'll go with this. The big things that we have to talk about here are obviously back pay to former athletes. That's a big one. There's a lot of money involved there. Net, obviously the rev share, right? $20 billion over the next 10 years or so, $20 million a year. It's a lot of money. We got to talk about that. And then obviously the new roster rules and enforcement arm. And we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of NIL being kind of monitored. And I think really at the end of the day, the big takeaway from today's episode is that Iowa State just got better. And I know that it might not seem that way. And to be completely honest, I think you could probably argue both sides. But I think from my perspective, the way I'm choosing to look at this is that Iowa State did gain a few advantages. Now, number one, I do think that the regulation of these NIL deals will start to help Iowa State in the long term. I think that there's going to be a few deals out there that might get nixed, and they'll be, obviously, if they're nixed, they're closer to what Iowa State can pay. Right, that's point number one. Point number two, okay, this whole rev share regulation and the way that whole thing is structured is now going to kind of squash or squander the transfer portal as we've come to know it in the last 6 to 8 months. All right, and a lot of that movement was really a result of collectives and donors and schools trying to beat this very settlement. Right. So they wanted to get all the money in, front loaded, get it in right now, give them $40 million if we have to, get them on the team before the settlement happens. And so when you start to see all of these athletes gaining all of this money, right, you're a sophomore at school XYZ and you see someone of similar skill level just sign for $500,000. What's stopping you from jumping in the portal yourself? So the portal numbers were way up, and the numbers that were being spent in the portal were also way up, right? That was not to Iowa State's advantage, which we'll talk about more in the third segment. But nonetheless, I think that now that that has kind of come to a little bit of a close, Iowa State will be okay, in comparison to what the last few months really have been in the transfer portal. It's been absolute chaos. It's just not been good. It's been out of control. And so now that there is going to be a sense of kind of some reasoning, Iowa State, I think, is in a much better spot. And then finally, as far as the roster limits goes, I think Iowa State holds a little bit of value as far as the guys that are on the team. You're here to be developed. Okay, we don't need the best athletes on the team or the best athletes in the entire world, right? So you're on the team. We're developing you. We're really putting a lot into you if you're on this 105-man roster. Therefore, I think the retention will be higher. Now, we've talked about how Matt Campbell doesn't necessarily want this limited roster. It seems kind of backwards to him. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. We're a school. We're here to teach these kids and develop them. Why are we limiting the number of kids on the team? If they're walking on, like, we're not a professional program. Why are we doing this? Nonetheless, I think that the value that Iowa State holds from a culture perspective will help propel them into, if you're on Iowa State's roster, you are here to stay, which I think over the long term benefits a program like Iowa State, as opposed to some programs that will see extremely high turnover from very high level athletes. Yes, but you don't get that level of consistency. And not to say you'll find a diamond in the roughs, diamond in the rough. I think with the roster limits being what they are, it will be a lot harder for football and for basketball, and then obviously for all the other sports. We probably won't talk about that today, but that is a whole nother can of worms, a whole nother barrel of monkeys, if you will. There is so much going on for track, for swimming, for gymnastics, for you name it. I was going to go baseball, but Iowa State obviously does not have baseball, softball, right? So all of those kind of Olympic sports are going to see it's going to be tough. Wrestling big at Iowa State, it's going to be a little bit of a problem as far as roster limits goes. You're going to have to battle with that if you're a coach. But nonetheless, you go to the football side. I don't know how the diamond in the rough thing kind of factors in here, but I do think that in the long term, a school like Iowa State, and this will be something we talk about in the third segment, will benefit from this kind of concept. As like, if you're on the team, you're really like, we're really going with this. This is what we're doing here. And I think we'll see less turnover on the way out. Obviously you can bring guys in the portal, and we'll see how that goes. But I don't think on the way out that it'll be extremely noticeable. Now, to tie all of that back up into kind of a bow here, I do think Iowa State comes out on top here. Now, this is something that I don't think either Campbell or Otts are super thrilled about. I think there's a lot of question marks. I would like to know if Campbell now at least can sleep at night knowing that the rules are semi laid out for the fall, something he's mentioned multiple times. Obviously in spring practice, and then I believe he mentioned it on the Cyclone Tailgate Tour as well. This kind of like, hey, we don't even have the rules yet, and it's like the middle of summer. We're playing in the fall. Like, what are we doing? So I'd like to know if he's sleeping a little bit better now that there is kind of an idea of what the rules are. Nonetheless, I don't think either of them are thrilled about it, but I think in the long term, Iowa State will be okay. The question, though, really in my mind, lies in rev share. That's where I think everyone is looking. I think that's where everyone is dialed into, and I think it's arguably the biggest piece of this puzzle, right? If you got 1,000-piece puzzle, that's 5 by 7, and then you got a piece in the middle that's 2 by 2. Like, that's a pretty big piece of the puzzle. It's kind of like what rev share feels like right now. That's kind of what it feels like, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up right after this. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I have been keeping my tab on Tyrese Halliburton, propelling the Pacers to a tied 1-1 series situation with the Knicks. I cannot believe they are in this situation. I am certainly keeping an eye on that one. And on top of that whole thing, how can you not be excited about $200 from just $5 if your first bet hits? That's like a 40 times increase. That is wild. Wild. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. The House versus NCAA settlement has, in some ways, completely come to a close. Now, there are going to be follow-up lawsuits and all this, that, and the other thing. It's going to get messy. It's going to get dirty quickly, of course. When hasn't it? But from kind of the perspective we've been going at this, it seems to kind of have come to a close. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the rev share is the biggest thing that's on everybody's mind. I know it's on mine for sure. If you feel the same way, let me know in the comments down below. If you're watching on YouTube or at Nick_Marv on Twitter, it's where I reside a lot more of my day than I should. The rev share is something that I think is especially important to Cyclone fans because of the comments that Jamie Pollard made on the Spotlight with Elijah Moore, and the ones obviously I commented on them. They were pretty serious. I mean, I watched that episode and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, and then Jamie Pollard just kept dropping nuke after nuke after nuke, and I was like, dude, are we cooked? Like, what is going on? I didn't know it was like this. I really didn't know it was like this. And I think the whole sports world heard it. I really do. There was major networks talking about the comments that Jamie Pollard made. And so I think it's only fair that every Iowa State fan is now a little bit on edge when it comes to rev share. Now, the big thing with the rev share is that there is $20.5 million that each school can spend on paying athletes, right? And the 22% is that number that they are allowed to spend. That's the number that I thought was the case. And then the way that Jamie Pollard was speaking about it, I wasn't quite sure. But it does appear as though schools are allowed to spend up to 22% of their athletic generated revenue, and the cap is at $20.5 million. Now, this cap could go up by multiple different kind of metrics for multiple different reasons. There will be all sorts of checkpoints in the next 10 years that this settlement is like set for, as far as like TV deals or conference realignments. Obviously they'll kind of just do a check-in, and it's kind of projected, per Ross Dellinger here. It says the first year cap, $20.5 million per school with escalators to as high as $33 million by 2035. So yes, right now it's $20.5 million a year, $33 million a year by 2035. If there was ever an apprehension, if there were ever a sign that Iowa State could fall behind, it is that $33 million in 2035. For Iowa State to achieve that number, I think they need to have substantial success. I mean, we are talking probably at least 2 Big 12 championships in football, probably an Elite Eight or a Final Four appearance in basketball. I would imagine either a regular season or another 2 or 3 maybe tournament Big 12 wins in basketball, just from the big 2 sports. And then obviously you look to all the other sports to maybe chip in a little bit as well. Cross country has been so great for so long, and I do think that the softball team can contribute as well. Now, I did say I think that this is going to be positive for Iowa State. I think that the rev share is going to help even things out, and I'll get to that in a second. But I think that this number and the escalation that we're looking at, that's kind of serious. $33 million is being projected. That's a lot of money. That is so much money. Like that's 1.5 times what we're looking at right now, staring down the $20.5 million. And that already we've talked about is a number that I think Iowa State would have to stretch to get to. You're going to lose money on renovations, right? Things of that nature. It's not that Iowa State doesn't have it. I think I would say based on the trajectory that we're on, I think Iowa State has it most years, in comparison to not, right? I think 7 out of 8 years Iowa State has that money. There might be a down year in there. But it's like out of the 100 or $98 million that Iowa State generates, do we really want to be spending 22% of it on the athletes? That's really the question. Because now your revenue that can be put towards, renovations, all sorts of things, right? New facilities, renovating old facilities. It helps with, obviously recruitment and whatnot. Now you're down $20.5 million. And that's what Jamie Pollard was talking about. Was the big wrinkle in this is that Iowa State does not fund the Iowa State athletics, right? So there are schools like Arizona State out there, and Virginia Tech was another school that was mentioned in that interview. But schools, namely like Arizona State, that chip in the school, right? The school entity, Arizona State University, chips in $50 million to Arizona State athletics, the athletic department. The athletic department receives $50 million from the university. That can't happen at Iowa State. That can't happen at the University of Iowa. That can't happen at Northern Iowa either. The University of Northern, not, no. Is it? It's UNI. Let's leave it at that. University of Northern Iowa. I think it's what it is. Because of the whole legislature, we're getting deep into real politics here with this one, like the Iowa State Board of Regents and all this, and it's just how it works. Now, it leaves Iowa State at a bit of a disadvantage because the $20.5 million is literally truly from the athletic generated revenue. It's not from the school at all. Now, Arizona State is allowed to spend $20.5 million or 22% of what's generated on the athletes, but that's no big deal to them because they're at least receiving $50 million. And who's to say that the school doesn't bump it up to, what would that be, $70.5 million? We'll cover the 20.5 and we'll put another 50 in, says the head of the university, not the athletics department. We'll cover that. We'll cover the athletes, and here's the 50 million that we're supposed to give you every year. That puts Iowa State at a major disadvantage. But I do think that the whole thing, if you look at the major picture here, you have to look at it in the way that this is now kind of curbing the pay to play. There are going to be situations where things like that happen, especially in the Big 12, where Iowa State's at a disadvantage. I was going to say a little bit. No, it's a pretty big disadvantage. It's a problem. And Jamie Pollard laid it out. He talked about it in the interview with Elijah Moore, and he talked about it on the Cyclone Tailgate Tour, saying like we're kind of in trouble down the road here. He did say on the tour that we're going to be fine in the short term. He mentioned obviously in the interview with Elijah Moore the reserve that they have right now. He said for about 2 years they'll be good. But then it will start to become a question mark, and that's something we'll talk about obviously in just this next segment and down the road. But it seems like in the short term, Iowa State will be okay. In the long term, that's where the question lies. But really what RevShare does, in my opinion, what it does right now is it starts to curb that pay to play. You don't see as much of, all right, we'll give you $4 million if you transfer over by, by the beginning of next season. And we can get you in here. Maybe you're a second string, but at least you're off of their roster, or whatever the case is. You're not seeing that, partially because of what the rev share is, but also partially because of the kind of monitoring of these NIL deals, making sure that they're fair. I believe it's anything over $600 is going to be kind of part of this NIL Go situation, where the NIL deals between athletes and third parties are being determined, how legitimate they are, or whatever. It adds this whole other layer to this whole thing. I think that benefits Iowa State. I think that's something that Iowa State absolutely, you aren't able to compete in that facet, pay to play, right? You can compete if the number is even. Iowa State will struggle because of Arizona State being able to have a $50 million extra budget on top of for the entire athletics program. But Arizona State's only allowed to pay $20.5 million from the school or from the athletics department to their athletes. So is Iowa State. So that being level, I think that benefits Iowa State greatly. Now, there is another wrinkle to this. Does Iowa State actually enroll and do this, or do they decide to opt out and not pay their athletes at all? I know, a shakeup for sure. We'll talk about that coming up right after this. So the House versus NCAA settlement has officially been settled, if you will. And you're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hopefully you're settled in as we talk about a little bit of an interesting situation. Could Iowa State choose to opt out of the settlement terms, thus prohibiting them from sharing revenue? Ooh. What a shakeup. Could they? Yes. Should they? Probably not. It's my opinion, at least. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm going to be completely honest. I think you have to opt in to be able to pay these athletes to compete. On the surface level, that's how I view it. I just don't see a reality where Iowa State can get away with not paying anyone a cent, essentially, other than from collectives. There's no money coming in from the rev share route. I just don't see you're seeing schools commit 17, $18 million to football. These Big East schools that don't have football programs or football programs that they care about, committing that much to basketball. What is that going to look like over for the next 3 years? How good is UConn or Villanova or Creighton or St. John's going to be? Question mark for sure. How good is Ohio State going to be at football? Question mark. I literally picked the national champion. We could take any Big 12 school, obviously Arizona State, a school we just talked about. But I do think that there is an element, like, let's just play a little devil's advocate here. Let's have a little fun. Let's kind of turn the coin over, see what's on the other side. What if Iowa State were to opt out? Now, I'm not seeing a whole lot of logistics on this. I'm not seeing a whole lot on what this would actually mean. Is ramificate a word? The ramifications of this, what those would be. But I do wonder if Iowa State could somehow gain some leverage by doing this. It wouldn't be a whole lot, but it would be some. Now, stick with me. Hear me out here. I want to clear up. I don't think this is a smart play, but what if this were to happen, right? What would this look like? I wonder if Iowa State's pitch to prospective athletes, be it from high school or from college, obviously in the transfer portal, is almost solely on the developmental and cultural fronts. Something we've talked about at just ad nauseum, just over and over and over. And I think it's Iowa State's probably strongest suit. You obviously heard Matt Campbell's quote after the Pop-Tart Bowl where he said there aren't a lot of college, teams left in college football. We have one in Ames. Very real. I believe the same to be of the basketball team. Obviously, the culture that Odds has built is special. It's, in my opinion, second to none, a quote that I like to throw around. And the same thing can be said of football. So if we leverage those two, the development you gain at Iowa State, be it on the football or the basketball playing surface, the field or the court, we've seen it obviously with big name players in football and obviously Curtis Jones, probably the biggest name from basketball, but also Joshua Jefferson. Too many football players really to name, but you can name many of them really. Higgins, Noel, obviously getting drafted by the Texans. Purdy had his moments for sure. Let's just, what I'm saying here. So this development angle and this culture angle to bring players in and to keep them, like, what are you saying by that? Right? You're saying you're more than just a number. You're very important to the program. Like, we want you here. Of course, there are going to be guys that leave, but in theory, let's just say that this non-monetary approach is effective. Now, there are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts about that, right? We have to acknowledge that the amount of money that some of these athletes are being presented, I don't know if I could turn down in any situation, right? Like, it's wild. So I'm saying that this is a little bit crazy here, but what if? So we build this team based on culture and development, both football and basketball, and the fan base is going crazy, and we're starting to see wins because it's this true team, kind of vibe, and this idea of what's been built, as opposed to just paying for these players. And it feels superficial, and it's what everyone didn't love about the NFL when it was, I like the college game more than the NFL because the players they're playing to prove something. They're not playing for their next paycheck. That's what Iowa State would be in comparison to everyone else. They would be different. There would be something unique about going to the Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa, the very one and only special Cyclone Nation. All of that, right? Then now the special kind of bonus is that Iowa State has $20.5 million, and even more as that market, goes up, that salary cap goes up, to spend on increasing the value of the facilities and or new facilities or whatever it is, right? There are so many different things. Maybe they introduce a foot-long chili dog with a pound of fries underneath it that also has a slushy built in to the holder of the hot dog, and they sell that for $15 a piece. I know I would buy that in literally an instant. I'd ask if I could maybe swap out the slushy for Diet Coke, but that's just my opinion, and it's probably something they wouldn't let me do. They might say there's a free poster down the way if you want that instead. We also have ketchup packets right behind you. Don't forget the relish. You know I'd be grabbing the mustard first. Point is, there are so many options with 30 point or what do they say, $33 million at the end of this thing. If it's all said and done, in 2035, if we see this 150% markup on what the salary cap could be, there's so much money there that if Iowa State were to somehow build this idea of a culture of, what I just laid out, and then they also have a $30 million kind of bonus, if you will. Yeah, it pales in comparison to some other schools, namely Arizona State, just because of what JV Pollard laid out as far as what that looks like from their end. But what about other Iowa schools? I know you just hit subscribe to prove that it is in fact a Cyclone State, but when you compare Iowa to Iowa State, if that were to happen, if we were to just live in this utopia, which I don't know what it would look like for sure, but if we were to live in that world, I think Iowa State would absolutely dominate. I personally, I don't know. We do already. We have for years. We probably will in the front in the future anyway. But if that were the case, like I think that would only be positive. Now, could Iowa State do this? It'd be very tough, I think, especially with the numbers. The numbers will probably come down over the next few years, or maybe even immediately, just based on where they've been with this rush to beat kind of this House versus NCAA settlement. People were getting paid, or players, excuse me, were getting paid a lot of money just literally to beat that to get them on the team. And I think we'll see those numbers kind of flatten out, even out a little bit, which will be good for Iowa State. It certainly will. But if you were to basically pitch, like, we're not going to pay you anything from our university, you'll get a little bit of money from the collective. And we're going to talk about tomorrow some other ways that players and universities could be getting paid. So stick around for that. But, through these other methods, you're making about $1,000 a month or whatever the case is, just throw out an arbitrary number. That's going to be a tough selling pitch. It really is. But if you were to somehow start that snowball at the top of the hill, you put it in your little mittens and you pack it up nice and tight and you just start it down the hill. And it might take a few pushes, right? Because the gravity hasn't quite set in. But let's say you're on Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever the tallest mountain is, and you push it, Mount Everest, push, stops rolling, push, stops rolling. Give it a good shove, starts to roll, build up some steam, build up some momentum. Iowa State could be the next powerhouse. Is that wishful thinking? Absolutely. I don't think it makes sense. I think that it makes much more sense for Iowa State to opt in and pay the money. It's not ideal for the long term. I think it's a bit of a risk reward. If you were to opt in, you're looking at probably a short-term benefit, long-term problem. If you opt out, you're looking at an extremely risky situation where multiple magnitudes of situations would have to go your way to end up positive in the long term. But you're going to be in the short term. It's going to be tough. It's going to be very, very hard. So I think that the right play is probably just to opt in. But let me know down below. Do you think that Iowa State should opt out? It seems like it could potentially have some benefits, maybe, probably not. Let's not get too crazy here. I don't know. It's a lot of money though. Iowa State paying $33 million in 10 years. Can they keep up? Let me know down below in the comments or at Nick_Marv on Twitter. Come back tomorrow. We have a loaded slate. We'll be talking about other ways that the schools could get paid, some recruits that'll be coming into town. Can't wait to talk about all that. Be sure you hit subscribe down below before you go. Help prove it's a Cyclone State. Until next time, Cyclone. Wow. Until next time, Cyclone fans.